Welcome to my channel. My name is Melanie if you're new here, and today I'm going to be sharing with you my process step by step how I make perfect sourdough bread that turns out amazing every single time. And if you're here, I'm guessing that you want to learn how to make sourdough yourself, but you're not quite sure where to start. Because if you have gone down the rabbit hole of trying to research a little bit about sourdough, you know that it can be a really overwhelming topic and everybody and their brother has a different opinion on how to make sourdough properly. So hopefully I can just clarify some things for you and just take you through my process that is a proven method that has worked for me for the past 4 or 5 years. I've been baking sourdough bread from scratch for my family every couple of weeks, and I've kind of nailed down some things that have helped me along the way. I promise if you follow my instructions closely, do everything that I tell you, you're gonna end up with the most delicious bread, and it's only gonna get better and better every time that you bake. So before we get into the actual baking part, why don't you get yourself a nice cup of coffee or tea. Make this an enjoyable time where you can just sit and learn. I want to have a little bit of a chit chat before we get into the actual baking part so that we can just talk about really important things that you need to know before you actually get to the baking part. But the main purpose of this video is to actually walk you through the process. If you don't know anything about sourdough, I would recommend you just hit pause on this video and just do a quick search on Google or ask ChatGPT, what is sourdough? What makes sourdough different? And learn a little bit about what a sourdough starter is. And then as soon as you know just those basic concepts, why don't you come back and then we can get into the fun stuff, which is the actual baking part. So if I was new to sourdough and I was just starting out, I wish somebody told me some of these things. So I'm gonna share with you some of my top tips. I am a researcher. So whenever I take on something new or I wanna learn a new skill, I will research the crap out of this topic and learn everything that there is to know about it. So my first tip is to just focus on learning one method and mastering that method before you try and learn everyone else's method too. I warn you not to go down the rabbit hole of wanting to learn all of these different methods when it comes to sourdough when you're just starting out, because you will get quickly very overwhelmed and confused, and you will probably give up before you even begin. Take it from me, I have spent years trying different methods and techniques, buying different cookbooks, watching different videos, but the method that I'm gonna share with you today is the only one that has consistently worked for me every time. So stop watching a million videos and just watch my video. My next tip is you need to plan and prepare in advance to your baking day. You need to make sure that you have all of the necessary supplies, all of the things that you need in your home ready to go so that you can have a successful bake, because you don't want to go through all of the work of trying to make sourdough bread to realize, oh my goodness, I don't have the right pot or the right tools to actually do this. And sourdough is not the kind of cooking or baking that you can just wing it. Unfortunately, you do need to follow a method. You need to follow instructions very closely and well in order for your bread to turn out, at least at the start while you're learning the process, because there are so many different factors involved, like timing and temperature. These play a huge role in the success of your bread. So if you don't know anything about baking sourdough bread, you really want to pay attention to the timing and the temperatures so that it works. Clear a day, an afternoon off of your schedule to just be home, focus on baking bread, and you're gonna have a delicious loaf of sourdough bread the next morning. Yes, sourdough, it's a process. It's not gonna happen in 3 hours. Unfortunately, this is just one of those things in life that is not going to be instant, which is actually a beautiful thing. Just prepare to spend a full afternoon into the next day focusing on baking sourdough. Now, as you gain experience, this process is not even something you really have to think much about, but at the start, you do want to be able to give a lot of your attention to your dough while you're learning especially. Okay, so we've talked about being prepared, clearing off an afternoon into the next morning. And my next tip has to do with having an active sourdough starter. So I mentioned this earlier. If you don't know what a sourdough starter is at all, pause the video, ask ChatGPT, Siri, Google, go on YouTube, search up a video of what is a sourdough starter, and then come back. I highly recommend that you do not try to make your own starter from scratch. Why? First of all, it's a long process to actually create your own starter from scratch. It's going to involve a lot of time, a lot of flour, which you're probably going to be throwing out most of it. It's just not something that I would recommend if you're just starting out. You want to be excited about sourdough. You want to have a successful baking day where you are motivated and inspired to continue baking bread after. If you are dragging out this process over weeks just to get your starter ready, you may not want to even make bread by the end of it. You can ask friends, family, you can go on Facebook Marketplace. There is starter everywhere and people are so happy to share it with a friend or family member. Trust me. That's all you need to do. You don't need to make it from scratch. You can get it from a friend and you could start baking within like a day or two after. That's what we all want when we're first starting out, right? To get to the baking part, which is the fun part. One last thing, I want you to think about sourdough as a skill that you are developing. I don't want you to set your expectations at this like high Pinterest level at the start. It does take a little bit of time to develop the skill of baking bread and how to score your bread properly, how to shape and form it. But just like any other skill, over time you're gonna get better and better at it, and eventually it's gonna become like second nature. And so I don't wanna say easy because it's not easy, but it can be simple, if that makes sense. It's not easy because if it were easy, everybody would do it. The joy about sourdough, at least for me, is that it's kind of this unique skill that you have in your tool belt. You can be that person that brings the amazing sourdough bread to your family get-togethers or to the party, and everyone's gonna wanna know, how did you do that? And you're gonna be enjoying the best bread for breakfast or lunch or whenever you like to eat your sourdough, whenever you want. So get excited. You're gonna be able to do this by the end of this video. All right, let's talk about the supplies. What do you need to get started? Okay, here is everything that you need to make sourdough bread at home. So the first thing you need, sourdough starter, okay? You cannot make this without a sourdough starter. So that is the most important thing that you need to get first. So this is mine. I store it in a mason jar, a wide mouth mason jar. It just makes it easier to stir. You'll need a lid for it, and I always put an elastic, a little rubber band here on my jar, because when you feed it, you want to be able to see how much it has grown, and then it's going to reach a certain point where it peaks, so it's at its ready state, it's ready to be used in your bread, and by using the elastic, you can easily tell that it has doubled in size, which is what we're usually looking for. I'll give you a little peek. So I store my sourdough starter in the fridge when I'm not baking because that's the lowest maintenance way. You just feed it and then you put it in your fridge and you don't have to think about it for at least like another week or so until you need to pull it back out and give it another fresh feed. So I'll just give you a little, hopefully you can see that. Can you see in there? Come on, there it is. You see that? So it's just like this goopy mixture and it's only flour and water. That's it. So I'm just gonna pop this back in the fridge because I'm not baking today, but maybe you are. And to feed your sourdough starter, you're going to need all-purpose flour, whole wheat flour, and water. I use fridge water. My fridge water is filtered. I've heard that it's not good to use distilled water, but I'm pretty sure any water is just fine. That's all you need. Oh, and a kitchen scale. This really is essential when it comes to baking sourdough bread, at least following my recipe. You must have a kitchen scale, okay? And you're also going to need a spatula. So I prefer a thin spatula like this one. This just makes it easier to stir in your jar, but if you only have a regular spatula, that is fine as well. The next essential is a thermometer, preferably an instant read digital thermometer. You want to be able to check the temperature of your dough throughout the process. So grab yourself one of these. Next up, we have our bowl scraper. So see how it has like a rounded edge here? These are really cheap, really easy to find on Amazon. So make sure you have one of these. And then also a bench scraper. This is essential. You're gonna be using this quite a lot in this process, so make sure you have some kind of bench scraper. I like a metal one, and this one, I think this is like an Amazon Basics one. I also have another one because I bake bread a lot and I like to have options, but just, yeah, bench scraper. Now we're gonna talk about the Dutch oven, or the pot or the baking vessel that you need to bake your bread in. This is very important. A Dutch oven is a really good option when it comes to baking your bread. So I have an oval one. Mine is a Le Creuset. Is that how you pronounce it? Le Creuset? Le Creuset? I don't know. Anyways, it's a Dutch oven pot, and I have an oval shape. You can see the size of it here. And I also have a round shape. I'm gonna show you so you can see. Okay, here's my round one. This is like the perfect size too. I also have a really fancy, unique bread baking pan, but it's one of those items that most people will not have in their home when they're first starting out. So I don't even know if I should show you, but I'm gonna show you because I'm kind of a nerd. Oh, okay, this thing it's called the Challenger bread pan. So really you can only bake bread in it. That's the purpose of this thing. It's really cool because it has a flat bottom, like, can you see that? So it's really easy to get your bread into it and just pop the lid on, and it gets really hot. But the main thing here is that you have a Dutch oven or some kind of cooker with a lid that can get up to like 480 degrees. I say 450 is like the minimum temperature. If you have a Dutch oven, just make sure that it's at least a 450 oven safe pot. Whatever you choose, make sure it can get really hot and is safe at those temperatures. Now, the recipe that I use always makes 2 loaves. You're going to be doing a lot of work, so to end up with only 1 loaf of bread at the end of it, I wouldn't recommend it. So I always make 2 at once, and it's actually a little bit easier to handle the dough when you're using a little bit more. You don't have to have 2 pots. You can always just bake 1 loaf of bread at a time, take it out, and then put the next one in after. But if you do have 2 pots, it's even better because then you can just bake them both at the same time, and it's quicker. But don't let that stop you if you only have 1 pot. So the next thing you need is a bowl. So you need a nice big bowl. I like this bowl. It's quite big, but I love that it has a lid because this will easily just cover my dough and I don't have to worry about using plastic wrap. But this bowl also works great. It's not quite as big, but it's fine. You need a large bowl. This one's glass, this one's stainless steel. If I was going to use this bowl to bake or to make my dough, I would just cover it with plastic wrap. So if you don't have a bowl with a lid, then you will also need plastic wrap. If you have that press and seal kind that you just press along the edges and it seals it nice and tight, that works wonders. But if not, then just regular plastic wrap is fine. Just you want to make sure that air can't get into your dough because that will form a crust over your dough and you don't want that. The next essential is parchment paper. So just any kind of regular parchment paper. And this is for when you actually bake the bread. You're going to take your parchment paper, and I will show you this all in the video, and you're going to cut it out around your bread and place your bread on the parchment and use that parchment to lift your bread and place it in your pot. Okay, the next thing you need is razor blades. If you want to get fancy, you can get a lom. So this is my lom. Basically, it's just something that's going to hold the razor blade in place. See? It's my lom. But you don't have to run out and grab one of these at the start, but you do need razor blades because this is what you're going to use to put those pretty designs on your bread or to score your bread, which is like slicing your bread. That's like the bread word for slicing it on the top. Scoring your bread, holding the actual razor blade. Do be careful because obviously it's extremely sharp and you don't want to cut yourself. But if you're not comfortable doing that, then get yourself a lom. And I'm going to show you another one that often comes with like a kit for bread makers. Show you what it looks like. This is the other thing that I used to use, but I'm not the biggest fan of this one, to be honest. I like to be nice and close to my bread, so I prefer this one. But you do need razor blades, and you can buy like a pack of just, this is Platinum Series Japanese stainless steel double edge razor blades, and these have been perfect. I got these on Amazon. They come in like a pack of 50. See that? There we go. See? A little pack of razor blades. Make sure they're not like waxed, because you don't want to have any wax on them when you're slicing your bread. Next thing you need are Banneton baskets. So that's these right here. See that? These are really handy. I highly recommend getting a couple of these baskets. So you can choose between round or oval, but when you're picking which one to buy, make sure you pick the shape that will fit into your Dutch oven, okay? If you have a round Dutch oven, don't buy an oval basket because your bread is not going to work in the round Dutch oven. So think about that. I do recommend getting these. These are so worth the investment. I have only ever used these, to be honest. I have not tried making it in a bowl, so I can't really speak to that. I recommend buying Banneton baskets, and I believe these are a 9 or 10-inch size. Also, the baskets should come with little linen cloth like this that fits right into your basket. This isn't essential, but I do prefer to use the bread covers when I put my bread inside. And just to quickly touch on the flour that you need to make the bread with, you really just need some kind of all-purpose white flour. It doesn't have to be a bread flour. I have found a really nice bread flour at Costco that I like to use, but the all-purpose flour that I've used in the past turns out just as good. So just get like a nice quality, I like organic all-purpose flour, and then you will also need a whole wheat flour. And this is optional, but very helpful. You can get it on Amazon, or a lot of your grocery stores will sell this in like the organic section. This is just rice flour, and we really only use this when we are sprinkling it inside of those Banneton baskets. It helps the dough not to stick, and it does a really good job, and the dough does not absorb this flour. So at the end of baking, we just dust it off and it just comes right off. So this is really good if you can get your hands on this. But if you want to get baking and you can't find this, don't worry about it. You can use all-purpose and whole wheat flour instead of this. Hey guys, I forgot to share one last thing that you're going to need, and that's just plastic grocery bags, or also the plastic produce bags that you get at the grocery store work great. If you don't have those, you could also use like a kitchen bag that you put in the garbage pails, as long as it's unscented. Basically, you just need a bag that's able to fit over your Banneton basket once you put the dough inside. You just want to prevent any air from getting to your dough, otherwise it's going to form a hard crust on top, and that will ruin your bread. So just make sure whatever you use, it will completely cover that Banneton basket, and it can just be put in your fridge with those baskets until the next morning when we're going to bake. So I think I've covered everything. Hopefully you're not too overwhelmed. If this is your first time watching this video, just take some time to click through the video at the different stages and just get a general idea of what to expect in this process. And then when you're ready to bake, my hope is that you can hit play and just bake alongside me and let me teach you step by step each process and some of the things to look out for, some of the things you should pay attention to at different stages. And I really hope that this video is helpful to you and that you'll be able to make your own sourdough bread at home, and that it turns out amazing for you as well. And if you enjoy this video, make sure to hit the like and subscribe. Okay, let's get to the fun part. Let's get baking. Okay, it's baking day, and the first step is always feeding your sourdough starter. Now, just a note, if your starter has been kept in the fridge, it's really important that you give it an additional feed. So I recommend taking it out the day before baking day, doing this exact same thing, but leaving it on the counter until the morning of baking day, and then giving it another feed like I'm doing right now. So all you're doing is taking a bit of that sourdough starter discard, is what you call it, and I'm going to use my kitchen scale to weigh out about 40 grams of that starter. Now to that same jar, I'm going to be weighing out in grams 70 grams of all-purpose flour and 70 grams of whole wheat flour. This starter is a 100% hydration starter, and in simple terms, that just means I'm using the same amount of water and flour in grams. So 140 grams of flour and 140 grams of water. Now, my water is going to be slightly warmer than room temp. It's going to eventually come to room temperature anyways, but you don't really want to use cold water because that's going to slow down the fermentation process. So aim for like room temperature water, or just run the water over your wrist until it doesn't really feel like anything, and that's probably a good temperature to use. So I'm going to pour my water in 140 grams, and then I'm going to use my spatula, just wipe off any excess there and give it a really good stir. You just want all of the water to be mixed in with the flour, and you don't want to see any dry bits of flour in the jar when you're done. And it's a good idea to kind of scrape down along the edges, because do you see my elastic band here? You want to be able to monitor the growth of your sourdough starter throughout the day. So from the time I feed it now, which is around 8 a.m., it will take about 5 hours for my starter to be ready to use. So I'm looking for it to double in size. So make sure your elastic band is right at the top there of your starter when it starts. And then about 5 hours later, it should be doubled in size and nice and bubbly. And I'm going to show you what it looks like in just a moment. So now we're moving into the Autolyse stage. So this is when my sourdough starter is ready to use. So have a look. There's bubbles throughout. It has doubled in size. It's looking alive when you open the jar, okay? And it's slightly jiggly now. It's not like a stiff mixture anymore. That's what you're looking for when you're wondering, when is my sourdough starter ready to use? Okay, so now you want to warm up some water in a kettle. It's not boiling hot, it's just warm. And I do that because it's really important that your water is at a good temperature at the start. So I'm aiming for around 85, even 90 degrees for my water here, because it's winter and my house is a little bit cooler. But if you have a warmer climate, you can aim for around that 80 to 85 degree mark, and that should be good. So take your ripe, which is another word for ready, starter, and you're going to weigh out 200 grams right into the bowl of water. And using your hand, you're just going to combine and mix everything together. You could also use a spatula if you don't want to get your hands dirty here, but come on, we're making bread. So put your bowl back on the scale and just zero it out. Now grab your all-purpose flour. I'm actually using a bread flour here, but I almost always use all-purpose flour. This is just what I had in my house. So I'm weighing out 900 grams of all-purpose flour and 100 grams of whole wheat flour. So once you've reached 1,000 grams of flour, pay attention to your scale. You're gonna get messy. You're getting your hands into the flour and the water and the starter, and you're just squeezing the flour into the water. You're just helping the flour to absorb all of the liquid. So this is gonna take a little bit of time and it's going to be messy, but it's kind of fun. You're gonna feel like a kid playing with Play-Doh again. So squeezing the flour and the water, and using this pinching kind of method, I find that really works well. And you're gonna get a really good arm workout, so you can skip arm day at the gym today. So squeezing it, and then you're kind of scraping down those dry bits along the edge of the bowl as well. And eventually you can kind of start to pull at the sides and get all of the dry bits of flour to, not be dry anymore. So your hands are gonna be pretty sticky. So I like to use my bowl scraper to help get some of that off. You could also wet your other hand, and that also helps to get the flour bits off. Now all I'm doing right now is I'm using my bowl scraper to scrape the edges of the bowl. Okay, I'm getting all of those flour bits off of the edge, and then if I see any dry bits, I'm just pinching it into my flour so that there's no like hard pieces in my flour. So just go all the way around your bowl, getting all of the dough off of the sides if you can. Get yourself some plastic wrap. Mine was unfortunately not the press and seal kind today. I do prefer that, but I didn't have any left. So just cover your bowl really well with the plastic wrap, because you don't want any air to get inside of the bowl. So at this point, you are just going to set your timer for 30 minutes and not do anything, okay? This is the Autolyse stage. It's just letting the dough rest with the water and the flour and the starter at this point, and it's just absorbing everything. It's just having a little bit of a nap. So while it's napping, I'm cleaning up and putting my starter into the fridge because I am done baking. I'm probably not going to bake for another couple of weeks, so I just put my starter in the fridge and let it go to sleep there so I don't have to do anything with it now. Okay, so after it's rested for 30 minutes, it's now time to add in our salt and a little bit more water. I'm taking the temperature of my dough because I want to see where we're starting at here. If it's too cold, I want to think about a warmer place in my house that I can keep my dough. If it's too hot, I'm doing the opposite. So I find around 82 degrees is just right. So I'm weighing out my salt first into a little bowl. So 20 grams of salt. And then I like to use warm or even hot water. But if your dough is over that 82 to 85 degree mark, you can use cold water here to try to bring down the temperature a little bit. So I'm mixing the salt in the water a little bit with my fingers, and I'm just dumping it on top of my dough. Now, you're gonna be using your hands kind of like a claw. So you are squeezing the salt and the water into your dough here. We're not really trying to build any strength. We're not kneading the dough. We're just doing our best to help the dough absorb the salt and combine the water into this dough. So as you can see, I am stretching the dough over itself, but they're not big stretches. I'm just using my hands to squeeze the dough and then pull it up and over itself. And I'm kind of alternating between these two movements. So pulling it up over itself, and then I'm going to be taking my hands and squeezing into it until I don't feel any more little salt bits with my finger, and the water has mostly been absorbed by the dough. So you can see my dough is still a little bit wet, so it's not ready yet. So I'm going to keep doing this. It's going to take you about maybe 5 to 7 minutes to complete this stage. This isn't a stretch and fold stage. This is just the beginning of bulk fermentation where we're mixing in the salt and the water. Now everything is mixed in nicely. I'm going to put the plastic wrap back over the top of my bowl and keep it covered. And now I'm going to be setting my timer for 4 hours. 4 hours is the entire time it's going to take for this dough to bulk ferment on my counter. But for the first 2 hours, okay, we're going to be doing stretch and folds. So this is now 30 minutes after we've mixed in the salt and just let it rest on the counter. We're going to do our first round of stretch and folds. So you're going to use a wet hand, you're going to reach in to your dough and you're going to pull it up as far as it can go without ripping, and you're going to put it on top of itself just like that. So you're going to go all the way around the bowl. So you're going to do about 4 of these. Then once you've gone all the way around the bowl, you're going to cover it up because we always keep our dough covered. And we're going to wait another 30 minutes. So again, this is the first 2 hours of our bulk fermentation stage where we're kind of needing to pay attention to our dough. We want to look at the temperature occasionally and just see where we're at. So again, we want it to be at around the 80 to 82 degree mark. And we're gonna notice as we do each of these stretch and folds that the dough is getting stronger and stronger. And it's going to start to form some nice bubbles, which is what we're looking for here. So this is my second round of the stretch and folds. I'm going all the way around my bowl. And I like to flip it kind of on top of itself so that the seams stay on the bottom of my bowl. So always keep it covered between these sets. And I noticed that my dough was sitting below 80 degrees, which means my dough is probably not going to be ready in that 4-hour window. So I wanted to help bring my dough back up to the desired temperature between 80 and 82 degrees. So I just kind of put it by my fire, and that helped to bring my dough temperature up a little bit. Now, the temperature is important to pay attention to, especially during these stretch and folds, because that's going to determine how long the bulk fermentation stage will last. And over time, and as you gain experience, you'll be able to just look at your dough and know when it's ready. But when you're first starting out and learning, if you can do your best to keep your dough between 80 and 82 degrees, you can safely stick at this schedule and the timing, and it should work perfect. So now I'm at my last round of stretch and folds, and as you can see, my dough is much stronger. I'm not able to pull it out quite as much as I did initially when I first started the stretch and folds, and I can even feel a little bit of bubbles forming. So you want to be a little bit gentle at this stage, not too rough with your dough, because you want to save all of those precious gases that are trapped within your dough. Now it's been 4 hours of bulk fermentation. So remember, the first 2 hours were stretch and folds, and the last 2 hours we did nothing. We covered the bowl and it just sat on our counter. Now you can see there's some nice bubbles and fermentation within the dough. That's exactly what we're looking for. The dough is going to be a little bit jiggly when you wiggle your bowl, and where the dough meets the edge of the bowl, you can see it's kind of domed around the edges. So these are all good signs. So now that bulk fermentation is complete, it's time to take the dough out of the bowl, and we're going to do what's called a pre-shape. So this is going to help build a little bit more strength in our dough, and you want to just use your bench scraper to go around the edges of your dough in the bowl to loosen it, and then tilt your bowl over and gently scrape out the dough onto a clean countertop. You don't want any flour on your countertop at this stage, because you actually want it to stick a little bit to your counter, and I'll show you why. So grab a little bit of all-purpose flour and sprinkle it as evenly down the center as you possibly can. Just eyeball it, okay? Because we're going to be cutting it down that line, so you want your dough balls to be about the same size. So where you sprinkled the flour, you're going to use your bench scraper, and you're just going to press and cut right along that line. And once you've cut it into 2 somewhat even pieces, I just kind of like to give myself some room and move one of those pieces away. Now this is probably one of the hardest steps, okay, because your dough is going to be sticky, and this looks actually easier than it is. So you might find it a little bit tricky to work with at first, but as you gain experience, it does get easier, I promise. But pay close attention to my bench scraper during this step. I'm using it to push my dough away from myself, turning it and drawing the dough back towards me. So this is helping my dough to form into a nice round shape. Do you see the angle of my bench scraper here? It's not straight up and down. It's actually quite close to the countertop. Have a look here. This is a better view. It's at like a 45-degree angle, and that's how it's staying through the whole movement. Okay, I'm pushing it away from myself and drawing it back, and I'm using my other hand to just kind of gently guide the dough. But remember, your dough is going to be quite sticky here, so you don't want to touch it too much. Otherwise, it's going to stick to your fingers, and yeah, that's not a nice mess to deal with. Now, you want to do this in as minimal amounts of steps as possible. Why? Because you don't want to overwork your dough here. You just want to get it into a somewhat round shape where it looks kind of perky, and that's enough. So you're going to get some all-purpose flour once they are in 2 balls, and just sprinkle the tops. And I just want to show you one more time what not to do with the bench scraper. You see the angle of my bench scraper, how it's going up and down? Don't do that. Keep it as close to the counter throughout the whole movement as possible. Away from yourself and back. Away from yourself, turning it and drawing it back. And that's perfect. Now you can either use a tea towel, or if you have a linen bread cloth like me, just cover your dough and set your timer for 30 minutes. Now that your dough has rested on the counter for 30 minutes, you're gonna get your baskets ready because we are now moving into the final shaping stage. So if you have some rice flour, this is where you wanna use it. So you wanna generously sprinkle the inside of your Banneton basket. Okay, getting right along the sides into the center, just get it everywhere, and don't worry about using too much because you can always dust it off after. And if you don't have rice flour, you can use all-purpose or whole wheat flour as well. I just love rice flour because it does a really good job of making sure that the dough doesn't stick. So to shape a round loaf, you're gonna sprinkle some all-purpose flour over the tops and a little bit around the sides, and use your bench scraper to kind of get some of that flour under the dough to loosen it from the counter. Because you're gonna use your bench scraper to flip it so that the flour side is now down. And I'm just kind of picking it up and stretching it out just gently and getting it into a somewhat round shape. So now I'm gonna be taking two sides, I'm gonna stretch it out and fold one side down and the other on top. Kind of looks like a little envelope. Now I'm gonna be doing the same with the opposite ends. I'm gonna stretch out one side, push it down into the middle a little bit and grab that other side and fold it over top. Now I'm just gonna roll the ball here so that the seam is down on top of the counter. I'm gonna clear away some of this extra flour because you do want the dough to kind of stick to your countertop here at this stage. It's just easier for it to build some tension and form into a ball. So now I'm cupping my hands around the dough and pulling it back towards myself. And now I'm gonna kind of pick it up and turn it so that I can do the same on the other side. And I'm just gonna keep going back and forth here, pulling it towards myself, gently picking it up, doing a quarter turn, cupping around it, pulling it back towards myself. And again, you never wanna overwork your dough. So we're gonna do this in as little amount of steps as possible to get it into the desired shape we want, which is a round ball. And a little tip here, you can also use your bench scraper at the end to just do some little gentle turns, and it will help seal any of those seams underneath the dough and just get it into a nice, perky, firm ball. That's what we want. So now we have our basket all dusted, ready to go. We're gonna take our bench scraper and we're gonna swiftly scoop up our ball and flip it upside down and put it into our basket. It's a quick movement because you don't want the dough to stick to your fingers, but you also don't want to be scared to touch it, okay? So grab your plastic bag, so whether that's a kitchen bag or a grocery bag, cover your dough, and I kind of tuck it underneath, but as long as the top is completely covered, you're good. You don't want any air to touch your dough. Now we're gonna shape an oval loaf. So if you have an oval basket or an oval Dutch oven, follow my method here. Get some flour on top and scrape underneath to quickly pick up and flip that dough again. You're going to gently pick up your dough until it looks like it's somewhat even, and my dough was a little bit uneven here, so I was just doing a little bit of tugging on the dough so that I could even it out. And you're going for a rectangle in front of you. Doesn't have to be perfect. That's pretty good. So we're going to grab one side of this rectangle, pulling it gently and folding it into the center of our dough. And I kind of press down on it so that it seals. And we're going to do the same with the opposite side. Pull it out and over. Again, just little gentle pressing so that it seals. Now, working from the top, you're going to grab it, stretch it out, and fold it towards yourself. And this part's really fun. You're kind of rolling it up. It's going to look like a jelly roll by the end of this. So stretching, rolling, and using your fingers, my thumbs there, I'm kind of using the pressure to seal it. And once it's rolled up, you're gonna cup your hands around the back of it and just gently tug it towards yourself, and that will just help seal up any seams on the bottom of it. And then you're gonna take your bench scraper and quickly just scoop it, flip it, and put it in your banneton basket. And you can see by looking at it, there's some open seams on each end. So I'm just going to use my fingers and pinch those seams closed. And it's nice that the dough is sticky on this side because once you seal it, it won't just pop right back open again. And there you have it. There's my oval loaf. And I'm just going to pop a bag over top and leave it on my counter for 30 minutes. You can set your timer here while you clean up. And then after 30 minutes, we're going to pop it in the fridge overnight. And you don't really have to worry about it until the next day whenever you're ready to bake your bread. Sometime in the morning is good. So now it's the next morning and we are ready to bake our bread. So whenever you wake up, you can stick your pots in the oven and preheat them at 480 degrees for 45 minutes. If your pots can only go to 450, then just put them in at 450 and maybe leave them a little bit longer. And I also put a sheet pan underneath to prevent the bread from burning at the bottom, but that is optional. Once your pots have fully preheated, it's time to take your bread out of the fridge. So I have 2 pieces of parchment paper that I've cut, and I'm just going to take my basket and dump out the bread onto the parchment one at a time. I'm going to dust off the old flour and sprinkle on a little bit of new flour. So I'm using rice flour again, but you could also use all-purpose flour if you don't have rice flour. So I'm going to trim up my parchment so that I don't have too much extra. And now is the fun part. This is the part that everybody loves. You're going to take your razor blade and you can look up some pretty designs on Pinterest if you want. You can just play around and see what happens, but I like to do the wheat design. So I'm just going to do some little nicks along the side here of my dough. And then when it bakes, it's going to look like a nice wheat stalk. You can see the angle of my blade here. If you're trying to draw on your dough and not so much slice too deep into it, it won't open up too much and you can do more of like a picture on top of your dough. But I'm also going to be slicing along the other side of my dough so that I can get an ear. So that's where the dough will crack and open up. So it's a much deeper slice and it's a quick movement. And you can kind of go in again if you want. But it's just one quick, deep movement, and that will give me more of an ear in my loaf. Now I'm going to do my oval, so I just dump it out, and I'm working kind of quickly now because once you've sliced that other loaf, you don't have a ton of time, so try to just work as quickly as possible. So I'm trimming up my parchment, and then I am doing a nice, deep slice for a big ear, and then I want to draw another wheat stalk. And I'm just going along the opposite side. And that's it. Now my bread is ready to go into the pots. So I'm going to quickly pull out my first pot, remove the lid, and carefully place it inside of the hot pot. And don't forget to put your oven mitt back on. Put the lid on, stick it in. And just a note, I'm reducing my oven temperature at this point to 450. So I'm going to put both of my pots in the oven, close the door, and do not peek. Don't lift the lids off at all during this time because they are acting like a steam room and you don't want to release the steam at this stage. So I'm cleaning my banneton baskets and putting them somewhere where they can just air out to dry. And after 20 minutes, I am going to take the lids off of the pots. And this part is so exciting because you get to have a little sneak peek at what the final product is going to look like, and it smells so good. So these are gonna need at least 15 more minutes in the oven. And after that point, you can take them out whenever they are brown enough to your liking. I would say though, it's better to go a little bit darker than you think because it adds extra flavor. But some people do like a lighter loaf, so that's totally up to you. And now this is probably going to be the longest 45 minutes of your life, but you do need to let your bread cool down a little bit before you slice into it. I hope you guys enjoyed today's video and that you found it helpful in teaching you the process of sourdough and how to make your own loaves at home. If you do make your own sourdough bread following my method, would you please leave me a comment below and let me know how it went for you? I would love to hear from you. Bye for now.